We've talked about three ways to control our exposure. We talked about changing the aperture, which is measured in f-stops. We talked about changing the shutter speed, which is measured in fractions of a second. And we talked about changing the camera's sensitivity, which is measured in ISO. But I have mentioned more than once that there's technically a fourth way to do this. So let's talk about that briefly. In a way, it's a cheat, and in a way, it's just pragmatic. But there's something called neutral density. And what neutral density is a filter that you put in front of the lens. If you're talking about making movies or working in video, neutral density is very commonplace. But if you're talking about photography, it's a little bit less so, and that's kind of a shame. But what I've got here is a set of 6 neutral density filters of various thickness, various densities. And if you can see this, all it is, let me move to the close-up here. All this is a filter. You can see my finger behind it. That's a little bit dark. It's like sunglasses for the camera. But these filters, I have 6 of them, and each one is a different amount. Look at how dark that one is. You can barely see through it. This one's kind of light. Very easy to see through this one. So the neutral density just screws onto the front of the lens. This particular neutral density filter is 3 stops of darkness. So it will make the world 3 stops darker. You can use these for a number of things. This crazy dark one, this is 10 stops of darkness. But it's really useful if you want to do stuff like time-lapse footage of something bright, time-lapse footage of clouds moving across the sky, for example, where you're going to point it at the sky, and even though it's the sky, even though it's sunny and bright, you're going to have an exposure of like 5 seconds. But during that 5 seconds, what will happen is things that move are nice and blurry, like the clouds moving across, and things that don't move, like maybe the Honolulu cityscape, are sharp. So there's a number of reasons that you might play with neutral density. So that's exposure. Yeah, it's a little bit complicated. I'm not going to pretend that it's not. You have 3 different things that you can control. You can control the aperture, you can control the shutter speed, and you can control the sensitivity. And making a change to one might mean you have to make a change to one or both of the others. But once you get these 3 things lined up, it's going to look great. And once you get these 3 things lined up, you can make changes to one, and you know what changes you have to make to the other. If you open your iris, you've got to use a faster shutter speed. If you use a lower ISO, you have to compensate by making either the shutter speed slower or the iris has to open more. And we'll talk about reasons to do this as part of another lecture. Depth of field and motion blur will be subjects for something that's coming up. Well, let's talk about that next.